Right, and let's get started because I have some things to share later on. But first, I wanted to uh, look at the schedule with everybody. I think we have 6 sessions left. Time goes fast after the break. It looks like it. So let's just check me on that. Let's see here. Uh, so let's see. I hope you can't read the details. I just want to see the large structure here. Right. So we're at the 29th. Next week is break, right? And then the week after that, like I said, on the 14th, in other words, I propose on the 14th and the 21st, I'll be meeting with people in person. Okay. That's 2 weeks in a row. And 28th is a Zoom. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Fourth is on the 4th. We're together. And then that's already in the month of April. And then we have 5 and 6. It looks like the 18th. Let's see here. Yes, classes end on the 21st. So we have formally 6 more sessions. Okay. And 6 sessions, if we go back and look at the calendar, hang on here. Let's see. Let me go back to the calendar. Go back to the syllabus. Syllabus. Okay. I share the syllabus with you here. Here. It looks like this. We have time because these next sections are a bit more, there's more new stuff and a bit more robust. So I'm thinking maybe we could devote about 2 sessions, 2 weeks per module, let's say. This week we have some general discussion about tools and versus instruments with David Pye and Thor Magnuson. And then over break, I'm thinking just to let you all read. I'll put the links in for Simondon, and we can discuss it after we come back briefly. But I'll give some introduction today to Simondon because it's really, really important talking about technology. But after break is when we'll get into this juicy stuff with the more than human and thinking in terms of ecology and ecosystems. I think, Tanya, I have you listed for that to give us a little bit of introduction to some of these people. So I'm thinking that we should do this over 2 weeks because there's quite a lot in here. And we'll start with culture and martyr. We can do that. And maybe some fungal skull. But anyway, we'll see that. But really, it's worth taking time to go through the Maturana and Vedanta. And I think we covered that in my seminar last fall. I don't know if that was the group that you were in, but Tanya, but I generally do that.
Could you repeat that? I'm sorry.
I'm wondering if we did Maturana and Vedanta in the class that you and I had with.
We did.
Okay. All right. So that's good. It's okay to visit it again. Mm-hmm. But that would be over 2 weeks. So I'd only ask you, Tanya, for example, to just introduce maybe the first week, not the second week.
Okay.
So I'll go back and recap for everybody. So introduction to Maturana and Vedanta myself. After that, then we have more good stuff on performativity. And I think we have you signed up for giving introduction to these people. I would propose that maybe all you need to do is give us a brief on Peter Brook and Artaud, those two, because these are the directors coming straight from theater, and they're very colorful. Certainly, Artaud is very colorful, so he has interesting biography. Um, so there's that. And then that's over 2 weeks as well. So probably we'll look at Peter Brook and Artaud over for the first session. Grotowski, let's put them together. These are straight up theater. Okay, really important kind of revolutionary figures in theater in the last couple decades. And then the second week, we'll go to adapting some of those ideas to other modes of expression. So that's the performance and experimental experience unit. And then we'll end with, we'll finish out with this question of politics, putting it all together and bringing it back to the pragmatic question. So what about everyday life, you know? And I think, Rachel, if you're here, or Lo, I don't know if you were in the same course, but if you took the course with Adam Nochek last semester, did you guys read something from Deleuze and Guattari, Thousand Plateaus?
We did, yeah. We read like the intro about the rhizome, and then there was another chapter from A Thousand Plateaus that we read, but to be honest, I don't remember which one it was.
And it wasn't, does the smooth and the striated ring a bell? Smooth and striated? I hope not, actually. That's what I want to do. Just say no.
I don't think so. And if it did, then
Um,
I could learn again. The Deleuze and Guattari stuff we did at the end of the semester and kind of ran out of time. So even if we had done it, it
yeah.
would be good for me to relearn it because I
Yeah.
didn't fully absorb.
Well, in fact, all this stuff, I mean, both Adam and I mean, we're not going to give people things that are kind of not worth rereading. Let's put it this way. I mean, we're not interested in teaching courses. We just read it for the term and forget it and never come back to it again. Kind of a waste of everybody's time. So I'd rather give stuff that you get something out of it the first time around, and then maybe later on you might come back to it, get something more out of it, you know. So that'd be cool. Yes, absolutely. We'll start with the rhizome stuff, just kind of, you know, like a kickoff, and then I'd like to go deep into the book and just pick out this one other chapter on the smooth versus striated. And it's just their colorful way of maybe distinguishing between thinking in terms of categories and schema and structures that are designed ahead of time versus trying to do things in a more fluid, improvisational, of course, given structure, improvisational, and innovative way. Okay, let's put it this way. It's very crude what I just said, but that's kind of a strong, both a philosophical and a political distinction. Okay, so that's why prior to that we look at this question of theater and how to not so much watching theater, but how to come up with charged events. Okay. And then if we have time, I would like to, that would be 1 week, okay? And then I would like to also introduce some really contemporary work by Isabel Stingers and Michael Martyr. Well, contemporary, okay, this decade, let's say, work. And we'll see. We'll see if I have time for that. Okay. So yeah, I think Cameron said he would give us an introduction to probably some of those people. Okay. All right. So that's the menu.
Could you give a little bit more? Could you explain the dessert on the menu, which is like the final? A little bit more.
Right. Normally what I do is I just ask people for a paper, and it could be a pretty brief paper. Brief, it's not like no, maximum 8 pages. Okay. I mean 250 words per page. Okay, that's kind of the going rate. And it should be something related, obviously, to that makes use of what we talk about and what we read in the seminar, and applied to or fleshed out with your interests, what you are working on, what your research is about in case you're doing a grad program, or what you think would be an interesting application connection with the world outside this classroom. So that was
Awesome.
okay. So I'm looking both for original thought from you in terms of applications, but also, of course, demonstrating that you've read something from this course and you got some ideas from this course. Just pick something. Okay.
Anything.
Anything from this course, right? Don't have to,
Yeah.
don't have to be an encyclopedic thing from the whole course. Just pick something that you like in particular.
Okay, cool.
So we don't have to connect to like every week's lessons. Okay.
Just pick something in particular that really strikes your fancy, So because I'm more interested in how it connects with what you're doing, what you're interested in, taking something rather than just to report back to me what you heard. Okay, that's really great. Often what people have done in the past, well, not often, sometimes what people have done in the past is they can work on a paper that maybe some other time can turn into something that they like to publish if you're far along in your studies. It depends on where you are, If you're not, fine. So that's cool. Okay. All right. Any other questions in terms of the course? Yeah. Okay.
I do.
Yeah.
Sorry if you already said this. Like literally a minute before this class broke my cell phone, so I'm mildly distracted. I was curious if an option is also a project instead of a paper. I think that had been on the syllabus and then it was removed and
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. It is. Generally, though, it turns out to be a lot of work for people. If you have a project, well, just to be practical, maybe if it's a project that's kind of you're already working on somewhere else, then I think it's more reasonable. In that case too, the thing is this, it needs to be something where, it's up for an opportunity to bring out some of these readings that we've done, some of the ideas that we talked about. And so it illuminates more, the significance of the work that you're doing in the empirical form, like computer system to do this or that, or maybe a social project to do something else, so that would be great, actually. I don't expect it because usually these kinds of things, it takes a while before you can figure out, oh, this is how it applies. It's not like a direct application. So that would be great. And then accompanied by a small paper. It would be more like a 4-pager. You say, okay, here's what it's about. Here's what the project is about. Here's how it connects. So think about it. Yeah, I can imagine for some of you, this is not a bad idea because you're already doing projects. Okay. Cool. Good questions. All right. Great. So today the menu could be, let's say 2 parts, 3 parts. Okay, two main parts and then a dessert, a coda. So the first part we'll talk about in the first part of our evening together. We'll look to discuss the 2 short papers, by David Pye. They're quite different, In that Stuart Magnuson, we'll have Alex give us a little introduction to these people. And then after a break, I'd like to show some slides, some pictures that kind of illustrate some of those things, and also maybe point the way toward the section, the future units. And then if I have time, I would like to take some time to say a few words about Simondo. Okay, just to get a kind of informal intro. So Alex, would you like to kick this off and tell us a little bit about the authors?
Sorry about that. My mic was muted. I mean, to start off, just reading the article. Dang it. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. Anyway, okay. Reading the article. Really, I like.
Before going to the articles, we're going to talk about. Can you just tell us about the 2 people, David Pye,
Oh.
right? Maybe you can tell us what you found about the author, David
Okay.
Pye, and the other one's
Um,
Thor Magnuson. That's all you need to do, really. Just
Okay. Okay. All right. Sorry, I
First.
missed. Yep. But for the two authors, I thought I thought they generally had some good ideas. I thought they generally had some good ideas in the article with just connecting with just instruments and culture and just tools and everything. So I liked how they just connected those ideals together in the theory in the article.
So can you start with David Pye first, since he's I think he's the one who's older and like he's passed away. Do you know? Can you tell something about David Pye?
Um, I don't have much about David Pye, but I mostly just read the article. I do apologize. It's- but
Well,
sorry.
maybe somebody else too. I mean, I can say a few words, but
Yeah.
see if anybody else has got some information about David Pye, Pye. I can I have some things that I looked up. It's kind of important because in his case, what he says is very much based on what he did, his profession. So let me just go here and take a look. Obituary. So just from like Wikipedia, right? He first of all, he's passed away. He passed away, I think, in the 90s. But he was really, really famous as a designer, meaning designer, and a craftsman making fine furniture. He was a furniture maker. He worked with his hands. He worked with wood, and he made amazingly exquisitely crafted cabinetry. Okay, furniture, fine furniture. So, and he taught that too. He was a professor. Where was he? Professor of furniture design at the Royal College of Art, and the RCA. This is in London, in England. So so Royal College of Art is one of the most important schools of art in the world, well, at least in the English speaking world, in the world. And he was one of the main teachers there. So he was kind of top of the game in terms of that kind of craft. Okay. And he also wrote these books about um, uh, the craft, different kinds of craft, and that's where this article comes from, where this section comes from. Okay, from the nature and art of workmanship. Um, so that's him, and he, you know, anyway, we'll get into talking about what he was claiming. But the other, maybe we can just go right to David Pye right away, and then we can think about talk about Thor Magnuson before we talk about his article, because he's quite a different character. So now let's open up. So Alex, do you want to say a few things that struck you as you read his article, which you found interesting from the David Pye article?
Certainly. I just want to. I'm looking at my notes right now. I made from reading this. So give me like a quick second. Sorry, these notes are in shambles. I do apologize. I had a really busy week, so yeah. But I liked how in the article he draws on theories that I like how in the article he mentions further that he draws on the enthusiasm in activism and the theory of the intended mind of. Sorry, I got a mild headache. I got a really bad headache right now. I'm having trouble focusing. Do apologize. In general, sorry. When it comes to the article, I do like how they do connect like culture and musical instruments and just the tools, just like all that like they're actually important to societies and stuff.
Or maybe you're talking about the other one, the Thor Magnuson article
Yeah.
on musical instruments.
Yeah.
And I was asking about the
Oh,
article on workmanship. Did you look at that one, the workmanship?
no,
article?
I
Okay.
didn't. Shit. Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the other one.
Dang it.
Well, we could just wait for when we get to this other one. You can make your points about
Okay.
the.
Okay.
Why don't you dive? Just dive right in, okay? I want to start with the first one because this one is more about like analog craft, like working with wood and hand tools. But we go to
Okay.
electronic and digital instruments. We'll get there. Okay.
Okay. All right.
We'll just start with the analog stuff. In fact, part of this whole point is basically, what do we even mean by analog and versus digital? We'll come to that basically. So let's open the floor. Okay, let's open the floor. Let's start from the beginning. Like, he's making some claims. Well, he's making many claims here, all right, based on his price. So what would be some of the strong claims that he's making right from the beginning? Like he's making some distinction between, like, he says workmanship, but what about workmanship versus what? So what is he distinguishing here?
Yeah, he's talking about the difference between design and workmanship. I wrote down just a couple real quick quotes. No designer can make bad work. Men produce produce good workmanship. Another thing I wrote out of this was we made it so we can unmake it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It meaning what?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I kind of make some presumptions around what that it is, because I often will think about, moving around in the world and seeing sometimes the infrastructure and everything that we have. I look around and I say, oh, look what we did. Look what we've done. We did all this. It's, there's a lot of power there and so it just kind of, it's mind boggling sometimes, actually, like, as little mammals, look what we did. We built all this, and so surely we can, do great things.
I'm thinking, well, first of all, he says that design is not workmanship. These are two different things.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
And he says here at the beginning, design is what for practical, first page, okay? Design is what for practical purposes can be conveyed in words and by drawing. Okay, I hate to say, guys. Workmanship is what for practical purposes cannot. Remember from the very beginning of this term, we talked about, representation. And along the way, we talked about that which can be represented and that which cannot. And there is stuff that's called the tacit knowledge. So, so that's right away a strong claim. And there's kind of knowledge in your fingers, as a craftsman making furniture or a violin, let's say, or doing even lettering, calligraphy, right? That you can't just write down in words. You know how to do it. It takes practice. Some people are better at it than others. And if you practice, you get better at it. So what other examples are there besides workmanship? Words like that?
Dance.
Dance, what else? It's like embodied, skillful, embodied work that you can get better at it. You can't write it down in words. Practice makes better, and some people are better at it than others, and involves embodiment. So what are some other activities?
Like ceramics and
Pottery. Yep.
pottery,
What else?
like crocheting, knitting.
Yep. What else? Keep going. Drawing.
Editing, like
Stained
media,
glass.
Yeah. Cooking, right?
glass blowing,
Yeah.
Dancing, cooking,
baking.
soccer, football, basketball. I mean, come on, archery, boxing, anything involves any physical sport,
Right.
right? Warfare, of course. Probably playing cards.
Riding a bike.
Games,
Riding
yeah.
a bike. Yeah, riding a bike.
Mhm.
Okay, what about poker?
Yeah, like strategy games.
Because Okay,
Mhm.
party games. I want-
Poker's a great example. It's very difficult. Like there's a thing in poker. It's not almost like very few other games where you're just trying to tune in so closely to other people's just the really fine details of how their bodies are like you watch them perceive you can't just have a strategy, right? You have to be really paying attention to what's going on with everyone else all the time. Well, I mean, you don't have to do that, but if you want to win.
Yeah, so I'm thinking poker is complicated now because poker, you also have formal things, like you have the cards in your hand, and that's information. Those are symbolic. So it is something that diagram, depends on interpreting a diagram, doing some looking at information content and doing maybe some logical thinking as well as the reading of other people's physical cues and see if they're bluffing, yeah.
But also putting out your own physical cues.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
To distract maybe or other purposes.
Yeah. So workmanship, okay, here about, design is kind of what can be conveyed in words and by drawing. And so he's scoping it here, obviously, by the domain of activity is making wood, working with wood. All right, really much that. So there's that. Okay, and there have been people who can be snarkily just criticizing him a lot later on in the years, saying, oh, he was later on in the article, it talks about difference between writing with your hand and doing print. What is it then? What page? Oh, page 21. Yeah. He's contrasting his example of writing with a pen versus the certainty of working with printing, modern printing. Lay out the type, and they just run off, 10,000 copies of the same book. There's no risk apparently, right? And that kind of thing. So that we're jumping ahead there, okay? But right away, it's just workmanship. Let's go there to the second point, second big point, what kinds of workmanship. So if you do work with manual tools, like chisel, or even just hammer or something like that, right? You can make a mistake. Right. And so
welding is a good one because you can't even see what's going on.
You have to kind of know and feel
Yeah.
That's amazing. Actually, I never thought that. Huh.
There's always this moment, especially, so there's a lot of tech, if you're, if you have money, then you have equipment that lets you see, but there's always a moment that you can't see. And in that moment, you can miss and it's bad. Yeah.
I never knew that. I never did welding. Oh, that is
and beautiful welding is very physical. You have to work it just right. I'm bad at it. My welding is bad. It looks terrible.
I never thought that. That's very, very interesting. That's very interesting. Huh. Very interesting. Because every other craft I know about, you actually see what you're doing at the moment you're doing it. Huh. Interesting. So, okay, so let's describe these different examples. So welding for sure. That's a radical form. And if you're carving something, like just doing wood carving, right? I don't know. Okay, first of all, I'm looking around my desk here, and it's actually hard to find handmade things. I mean, I don't have much. I have this, I have this, I have this. These are all made by mass-produced objects. So, wow. Actually, hey, can you guys look around your rooms to see if you can find something that's actually handcrafted? I don't. Wow, amazing.
Yes, I can.
Oh, you made that? Who made? Oh, that's
My roommate made me this business card holder.
Oh, I showed you. What's it made of?
Clay.
Oh,
It's
wow.
fired and everything.
Wow. Okay, that's something. And Tanya, are those made by young people or adults? That's a complex object. Really? Oh my. Wait, it's muted. I think you're muted, Tanya.
It's bits and pieces and they're like riveted. These are rivets. It's
That's
just all
amazing.
riveted together, this particular
Oh, that's
item.
amazing. Is it cut metal? What is it?
It's cut metal, yeah. And then there's just also like found objects.
Yeah, like
that-
domino. It's really cute. Okay, oh, I don't actually don't have, what? Wow. Wait a minute, hang on. Oh, wow, I can't believe this. Well, maybe this doesn't count. These are origami.
Oh, that's great. I love origami.
My daughter made these.
We
So
built this loft right here.
okay, there you go. Okay, that's
These
something.
earrings that someone handmade.
That's
Those are
craft.
nice.
Okay, that's craft. Okay. All right. Okay, so that's I'm in my daughter's room, so I thought I would easily find something because she's very handy and she makes a lot of stuff, but we're too neat here. We put everything away. Okay, anyway, she really is. So the thing is, he talks about this, right? So what constitutes workmanship is what? There are three things he said. Come on. It is three things put together. Right. He says this on page 20. He says, and I like it. He says, craftsmanship, he says, is kind of like a better version of workmanship. He says is where the quality of the result is not predetermined, but depends on the judgment, dexterity, and care. Judgment, dexterity, and care with which the maker exercises, which the maker exercises as he or she works. Okay, so dexterity, judgment, and care. And he said later on, he says that care is the biggest thing. Care is actually most important. You have to actually care about what you're doing, right? So, and then like this amazingly, exquisitely designed and crafted, Apple mouse. I mean, look, it's just beautiful design, all that, right? It's really sleek. But so it's not about how beautiful it is. It could be really, really beautiful actually, and it's perfect. It has this perfection in it. Kind of has an optimality in terms of design and form. But I guess he wouldn't say this is an example of craftsmanship, right? Or and also, well, what's going on here, right? What's missing? Right. What would you say? Why? I mean, why would this be not an example of craftsmanship for David Pye?
No care involved in making it.
There's no care. And then judgment, there was no exercise of judgment in the making of this particular work. There's judgment applied in the design of this thing, which is
There's not a lot of risk.
And there's no risk.
Yeah.
There's no risk. That's the main thing. There's no risk. Okay. That fact is very important that there's no risk, because it costs so much to design this object and so much to set up the factories. Apple has to recoup the cost of all that. Huge cost, upfront costs, right? By making sure it can manufacture, however many thousands you need of this to recoup that, right? So there's that. Okay. And then and then the workmanship of risk. I wonder about the word risk though. I always wondered, I thought maybe risk is not quite the right word. So what do you think would be meant by risk?
What comes to my mind is like, let's say, let's rewind, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. And it's like, oh my gosh, I need to build this shelter for myself. Otherwise I'm gonna freeze in the winter. So that's what come to my mind. Like there's less risk in creation now because of the economy and supply, but I mean, formerly there was a lot of risk in creation because of the lack of supply and access.
Yep. Yeah.
I took it. Oh, sorry.
No, please.
I took it more like specific to the risk of, like, I guess messing up, for lack. That's like the most basic way I can think to phrase it. But if you're doing something by hand, for instance, like we started learning how to make stained glass and we're doing it handmade with tools, and there is a risk of breaking the glass and totally destroying the whole piece and having to start over again, versus something that is made with certainty where that wouldn't happen. That's how I took the risk to mean, like the risk of ruining it, I guess, with ruining being relative as well.
Yeah.
I think also he says something about that each operation during production is predetermined, and I think that predetermination is part of, like, that's where you're avoiding risk by making sure, like, this is how it will go. And when you're producing something more by hand, then there is a lot of, I mean, I've done a lot of lapidary work. You work with stone, and you have to make decisions, but you don't know what's underneath. You carve away bits, you grind away bits, and what comes out underneath might not be at all what you thought. And so there's, like, the outcome isn't certain as well, right? Like,
Yeah. I'm thinking about difference between ruining something, and making it like the stained glass breaks versus a degree of variability that's 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 very different from the certainty you get from knowing ahead of time the shape that's going to come out, and there's something in between. There's something in between fully determined form, predetermined form, and this kind of chance result that destroys something or yield something that I can't use, in this category, like a cup or stained glass, whatever.
I was going to say even a mass-produced product could be broke. That's why some of those curved glass screen film is so expensive, because even making by from the facility, it could break. So the yield is low, the price goes up.
Yes. And then wouldn't you say, well, that the whole point of the machinery, the automation, right? Automatic machinery is in fact to give us as much certainty as possible. That's absolutely, and that's another example. Yes, something going wrong. Now we go back to the craftsman, the manual craftsman, who's working. Isn't there something else that's in between here that maybe he's trying to express? Talking about dexterity, judgment, and care. Nothing in here talking about right or wrong. By the correct implementation, the correct fabrication of the imagined form. Nothing about that. But it's also not about things breaking. So there's something in between. So can we articulate that a little bit?
so in fast food production, McDonald's, Taco Bell, so one of the things that is key and important in that model is that it's done the same way every time, and therefore it may not be, you're not going to necessarily, I mean, maybe someone thinks this, but you not buy a McDonald's burger and it might not be an exciting experience, but you know what the experience will be. You have may not be the right word, but they do it the same way over and over and over and over again, and so that you know what you're getting. And that's part of the thing with fast food. You know what you're getting as a consumer, versus fine dining. It just is, there's a lot less certainty on that.
Yeah.
And so both are right. They're not wrong. They're, but the one is much more based in some kind of craft.
Like, we're gonna go to cooking. Remember, I talked about the midterm meal, and and that comes out of the questions about score, recipe, and notation. So we'll come to that in just a minute. Good source of examples, but going back to some of these crafts like welding, or stained glass, or origami, or the clay forming. Morgan showed us a clay piece that was made, custom made and fired, right? So take the clay example, and you're shaping pottery, Probably everybody here has done that, right? You probably most of you tried your hand at that. Haha. So she's shaping the piece. That's not
Question, actually. So I'm looking at this mood board that I made for like the new year, and it has a bunch of like, obviously it's made out of books and magazines and like ripped pages from that, which aren't like handmade, but since like I curated this like poster, like would it fall into that category?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Well, I don't know. What do people think? I mean, what do you think? Relative to how Pi is thinking, relative to how David Pi is thinking, what do you think? What do you think David Pi would say?
I mean, there's no risk involved, but there was like care and thought and attention put into it.
In fact, since if you've read Thor Magnuson's article, this maybe shades over into that one,
Yeah.
right? A bit more like that, because then it's more information arrangement, informatic arrangement of symbols. There's a kind of one level of abstraction above the material of working with paper or wood or something like that. And in the other article, Thor Magnuson, he distinguishes between analog musical instruments working with the physics of wood and air and whatever, ebony, and another layer up with the electrical properties of electronic instruments, and then above that, computer, symbolic stuff. So maybe this is beginning to head over to that richer set of,
Well, by the way, I just found this wallet. It's my friend. Actually, I should turn off the
background.
this handmade wallet, but he never got to finish because he's leaving the country. So he gave me this unfinished wallet that he made and the kit, the leather kit. So he's like, enjoy it and go finish by yourself. I haven't worked to it yet.
Gave you the tools to finish it? He gave you the rest of it, the kit? That's very funny. Oh, that's very funny.
That seems like quite the task to undertake, Lo.
Yeah.
Oh, it's possible. It's feasible, possible if you have the time, right? But then you have a material example in front of you, in terms of craftsmanship, right? So maybe this is actually very important. I actually think this is a very, very important domain of gestures and activity that are intentional. There's some intention behind the gesture, okay? Not kind of random twitching of my fingers. In addition to the care, judgment, dexterity, it's intentional. So that's something implied. And all these terms, judgment, care, let's leave aside dexterity. Judgment and care and intention imply a subject, right? Imply an intentional subject, and that's really key. Whereas if there's a big, printing press with these big plates of type, and you run it to make 10,000 copies of a newspaper, then say, there's an intention with the typesetter and obviously the editor, but once the machine is in motion, they're not active. Those intentions are not active. So I think that's a silent part of this article here. Just something about that, I think. And the other part, I think, is a question of, he doesn't use the word beauty, does it? I don't think he uses the word. What does he? I don't know. Maybe he does. I can't remember. You can search for it. But he's talking about craftsmanship, not rather than aesthetic. But still, this idea that when you're forming taking the tool and using it, like with the paintbrush or something, you can do it better in sometimes, maybe not as good another time. There's this idea of that there's a variation quality, which is not given in advance. That's part of the risk. And without the risk, you can't do it. Does he? Did this section have the example with the chisel? Okay, let me just go search in my copy. No, somebody else has found it too. It's one of the best examples, I think. Chisel, hammer, and chisel. No. Okay, I don't see it, but I'll tell you the story. Because I think I got it from David Pye. So here's the example. You have you ever have you guys done some woodwork, working with wood? Okay, some of you. All right, just something more than hammering a nail. Okay, so if you've done anything like that, maybe you've had to just take a chisel, right? With a knife blade, right, and then hammer it to cut something. All right, suppose you had to do that. Could be just with a screwdriver. With a chisel, or with a certain kind of chisel, which has a sorry. Here, pretend this is a chisel. Okay, sometimes you have a chisel that's curved like this, and the blade. This is the blade end. Okay, sharp, and then you hammer it from behind, so you can cut a cut a groove in the wood. Okay, normally, if you have a machine tool, just have a big drill thing, drilling this, run the wood past it, and just cuts out this groove. But you can do it by hand too, and it's a lot riskier, right? If you do it by hand, you have this. You can start the cut like this. This is a wood surface. This is a chisel. Where is it? Yeah, here it is. Okay, and I started by hammering it like this. Okay, pushing across the surface of the wood, and when you start that, it can slide all over the place, right? Because the surface of the wood is all flat. So you can might go like this, might go like this, might go like that. So it might not go in the direction you want. That's risk right there. Okay. So there's an art and skill of making those cuts so that actually carves out the groove in the shape and form and depth that you want. And that's not easy. It takes practice. Okay, so that's for me an example of this workmanship of risk. And when you're doing custom forms, when you kind of literally freehand, right? There's a lot of risk, but then your intention, you can actually decide, oh, I want to make it tighter here, looser there. It's like writing with a hand. It becomes an art, artistic expression. Okay, so there's an example. He mentioned, I think is David Pye, but I had to go find it later. It might be a different writer. Where this is beautiful thing that happens is that once it begins to make that cut into the wood, what was formerly just the quote raw material, the wood itself, becomes part of the tool. Because the tool is what makes the gouge, but then later on, what continues the gouge is the groove that's already in the wood. Because it secures that tool from flipping out and skidding all over the surface. It stays in the groove that's already made. And then you continue to cut more. You should do it yourself. If you continue to hammer on it, it will tend to continue in the direction that it started. Make sense what I'm saying? Okay. So it's really interesting because it's a bit Zen, right? Taoist, where it's not as if you have the tool and you apply it to dumb matter, just flat surface wood. It's more that the matter itself, the wood itself, can start to participate in the continuation of the groove. Okay, so I don't think he makes that point here, but that just shows us that there's some subtlety here between tool and medium. Okay. Now let's go back to just make one more comment here, observation here about materials. What does he say about materials and raw materials? This is at the very beginning. Can somebody recall for us what he says there?
He was talking about how you talk about materials, so you talk about wood or marble or whatever you're talking about, but that until it's not good material, until something's been done, or you get down to the essence of what is actually left for the craft. I'm not saying this very well, but it's just this idea that there's materials that on their own are not necessarily that great or exhibit any of the properties of workmanship that we're talking about, but that they're modified in some way, and then a lot of it's gotten rid of, and what's left is the product of the workmanship. So I'm not, yeah, but it was something like that.
Yeah, well, let's look for it because he says it well at the beginning. Let's go.
He says like a material,
It's on
some
page-
material.
Yeah, go
It's
ahead.
not,
Yeah, Lo, tell us what does he say about
it's
material?
not invoking the picture of the material itself, for example, the color, the texture, but instead it's symbolic of the royalty, the structure. I'm looking at the second page,
Mhm.
18,
Yeah,
very
okay.
beginning.
And what does he say about good material or raw material?
Material in the raw is nothing much. Only work material has quality. And piece of work material are made to show their quality by men or putting together so that together they show a quality which singly they had not.
Mhm.
Good material is a myth.
Yeah, there you go. Because like the raw material, like if you want to make fine furniture, you start with some woods, like hardwoods, like walnut or something like that. If you're making a violin, the fingerboard of the violin is made of a very particular kind of wood. The part that's black, it has to be really, really hard and has to hold its shape under high tension, et cetera, et cetera. I don't remember, maybe it's called ironwood or something. Um, and used to be found only in very particular parts of the world, et cetera, et cetera. But you can imagine all that preparation has to be done. You have to chop the tree down and full up, as he's saying, knots and parts that are muddy, parts that are eaten by insects, et cetera, the leaves. None of that's what you need. You have to, and then you have to treat it, right? To cut it into boards, and you have to cure the board, let it dry in a certain way. Da, 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 da. It's a huge amount of prior work before you even have the starting material. So there's no such thing as that's why he says a myth. It's a myth. You know, good material is a myth, but also raw material is a myth. This idea of raw material itself is not just not raw. It's not raw, right? When we read Simondon, I don't know if it's going to be in the section that you will have, but Simondon has a beautiful discussion, an example of clay and how people make bricks out of clay. You put some boards together, you knock them, you hammer them together, and you pack it with clay. You let the clay dry, and you get a brick. Okay. Then you start looking at it closely about what's going on. It's not so simple because those boards had to be cut from lumber, which had to be milled in, wood mills, like lumber mills, and then they had to come from logs. That you can track the chain all the way back to where the trees were planted in a lumber forest, and they were filled with skill and expertise all along the way. All along the way, there are people who are really skilled at doing what they were doing at that step, right? And there was also a combination between risk, the local contingent conditions, together with the skill that yielded these different intermediate materials before it even gets to be the board that you can hammer together. So there's nothing in the world that we have, the built environment that we have is really raw like that, like unprocessed. So what would be an example of some processed raw materials that we work with today, and the most processed raw materials that we have today? Just looking around you, raw materials. I have some examples. This time I have lots of examples.
Oddly enough, I find it kind of ironic that I'd have more examples to show if I was inside, but I'm outside and I am surrounded by refined built materials.
Well, name them. Like what? What are you looking at?
Well, like the table, the chair, the umbrella, all of the decoration. Well, this is my like handcrafted thing, but the material, I don't know if I wouldn't call that raw at this point. It's been
It's finished. Those are
staged and
finished objects, right? Those are finished
Yeah.
objects.
yeah, everything. I have a fire pit, but there's no firewood in it right now.
So this is white paper, right? This is supposed to be like blank paper. But can you imagine how much processing this had to go through to get to this point? I mean, incredible amount of processing to get these perfect rectangles to print on. Right? And those of you who are in the AME program, we have a lab full of fabrication lab, fab lab, right? Full of rapid prototyping machines, and cutters, etc. And you know those machines that are the printers, they're fed with plastic, a special, in fact, a special plastic. It's called, it used to be called PLA, a certain kind of plastic that's used in a lot of printers. And that plastic is specially manufactured to be really easy to, use as a so-called raw material in those printers. They claim that it's biodegradable, but think how many tons of that stuff is now out there in the world. So I'm not so sure. So yeah, gasoline, even wood, is highly processed, right? Before we can even use it.
You can add lithium on the list too. Just a common thing we need for like phones and batteries and stuff.
Yep, lithium. Yeah, and it takes a lot of processing to get it out of the ground.
Did anyone say glass?
Glass and steel.
Mhm.
Glass is an amazing substance, absolutely. And so absolutely. So some people have criticized David Pye for claiming that like the print shop or factories are examples of workmanship of certainty. And they say if you ever worked in an actual factory, even with lots of robotics around you, it's full of risk. It's full of uncertainty. These things always jam. The supplies get, they get some inhomogeneities and everything stops. So there's never actually a workmanship of certainty, even in the highly automated situation, but so-called highly automated situations. There always has to be some monitoring going on all the time. So that wraps, I think. I mean, there's more that you can read for yourselves. It's an easy read. I can recommend that you finish that yourselves. So we can go to Thor Magnusson, but maybe since it really is quite different topic, maybe you can just take a brief break to get some water and come back to the Zoom. Just take a few minutes and let's regroup around Thor Magnusson. Okay. The Magnusson has a lot of different ideas in it, and I'll just explain. It may seem specialized because it's about electronic musical instruments. Okay, and but I think the real value for this kind of seminar is really the kind of theories he's appealing to and introduces. So what I propose is to, in a sense, almost like work backwards from the end. And I wanted to point out some of those references that he's making so that it's really clear, kind of the takeaways that are kind of helpful more generally. So if we look at, well, maybe I won't go into that right now. Yeah, I'll do that after we hear a little bit more from Alex about the author, and maybe kick off the discussion for the paper. But then I'll take the baton back and give some more context. Okay, so Alex. This is the paper that you were looking at. Would you like to say a few words about the author, Thor Magnusson?
Yeah, I can have a few words here. I do apologize. I'm dealing with a major chronic migraine right now. It's medical stuff. I do apologize.
You're right. Okay.
Yeah. So Thor Maxim is a professor in future music music at the University of Sussex, and he focuses mostly on digital technologies and on musical creativity. So he kind of like focus on like just music and technology connecting together. And just reading his article, I do like how he I do like some of his theories connecting to I do like some of his theories connecting to culture, music, and technology, all designed together to form like good connections with the community and everything.
Did you get a sense of what he meant by the kinds of instruments he's talking about? What kinds of instruments he's looking at?
He was let me just look at my notes again. Just sorry. Uh he was mostly connected towards digital instruments, and he was talking a lot about digital instruments and just a lot about digital instruments mostly in this article from what I read. And he was actually sorry, he was also making a contrast between acoustic instruments and digital instruments in a way.
And what does that mean for our purposes? What is the difference between digital instruments and acoustic instruments?
Digital is easier in my experience to deal with, and physical acoustic instruments are just more of like a trained specialty. So it's not like, you can go on keyboard and make some sound with just with software with acoustic. You have to actually learn to use actual like acoustic instruments.
Mhm. Something about that. Okay. Goes back to this kind of workmanship of risk, right? Again,
Yeah.
versus workmanship of certainty. It's interesting, huh? So so let's get into this. All right. Thanks. I just wanted to draw some attention to if you look at the references, it gives me time to go find it here. Yeah, I can do share screen. Okay. See, first of all right. So floor is open, but now he's talking about different kinds of genres of instruments. So we heard there are acoustic instruments, there are digital instruments, meaning computer-based instruments based on computation. But there's a third category in between. And I don't know if we can come up with some examples, but they're in between. So I don't think he was very explicit about that, but maybe we can furnish some examples for the in between. Analog. Yeah, go ahead.
The in between was the electric, right? There's like acoustic, electric, digital, and well, I thought he did a really good job presenting them actually, because my first thought when I heard electric was digital. And then I realized what he meant by the distinction between the two. But
Which is what? What would you say? How would you put it?
that well, I was thinking electric was what he meant by digital, which is that it is, oh, I forget how he phrased it, but basically that it's essentially computed. And it lacks any of the handmade handworking that we're discussing. Versus electric combines the electrical and the manual. So like, I mean, it's literally in the name, so it's all I can think of right now, but an electric guitar is somewhere in between an acoustic, and it's not completely digital, and he talks about like going through the motions, so you still there's a gesture that corresponds to creating a sound. So for an electric guitar, you still have to have the skill to know where to put your fingers to make the sound that you're trying to make, but there's an electric component to the end result.
Let's take the electric guitar. I mean, who's played electric guitar here? All right. My son has, so I can do it vicariously. But electric guitar. So 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 maybe you can say a little bit more, precisely what's the difference between, let's see, what's the electricity doing for us, right? Versus computer. Cool.
The electricity is, I mean, in the electric instrument, I mean, initially, I mean, you have it's picking up some of the signal and then manipulating it in one way or another, right? So it's amplifying, or it's distorting, or it's, you know, stretching, or there's a lot you can do in real time, in the moment, with what could be an if the electronics weren't there, there's still something to play. Right? You can unhook all the electronics and you can still play your electric guitar. If you just won't be able to manipulate the output in that way. So that's what I think is happening there.
I think the main difference is the signal, the analog or the simulated signal versus the 0101 digital signal. For example, if you're talking about a full analog electronic piano comparing to a digital electric piano, the main difference is auto compressor, which is the analog versus the computing, the digital signal one.
You know, like nowadays there's digital audio going to speakers, and okay, sorry, coming back to the guitar, we can put acoustic pickup on the guitar, feed it into the amp. We can also get plug in a phono plug to some guitars and get what's called an electrical signal coming out of that, and goes to some interface, some piece of hardware, which will have to transform the electrical signal, which is analog signal, continuous, you know, voltages, into those zeros and ones that, you know, we're talking about. The A to D converter basically has to happen. And on the other side, what's coming out the wire is no longer voltage, really. Yeah, I mean, it's voltage, but it's not a continuous voltage signal. It's a bunch of zeros and ones. It's code. It's a code. And if you were to just pump it to a speaker, what do you hear? What do you think you'd hear? Just pulses, zeros, 1 0 1 0 1 0, which is incredibly complex, you know, waveform, but it's all 1 or 0. If you just put it back to a magnet, so to speak, back to a speaker, what do you think you would hear? I mean, some of you have done it, right? I've done it. What do you think it would sound like? It sounds like that. It's horrible. It's how you destroy your equipment. It's pretty graphic, actually. Graphic's not the right word. It's pretty palpable. If you take that signal coming out of the D side, the digital side, and pump it right back out to magnets, you get that. Okay, so it's nothing like the sound. It's basically it's a conversion of the oscillations of the wood in the air, right, into some tokens. You know, zeros and ones are basically, it could be, this is what gets into the symbolic domain that Magnuson talks about. Okay. It could be like rabbit, dog. It could be, you know, alpha, what is it? Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Foxtrot, right? But it's a code. It's an encoding, but it's not acoustic anymore. So there's a strong difference between the electrical analog, and the digital instruments. So that's the bottom of it. Now, another big part of what he's giving to us is introduction to, you know, what difference does it make that you have bodies playing these things, you know, human bodies. That's the embodiment part, you know. And then he goes into what he calls, what is it? So what is it? So these analog instruments, there are electrical instruments, and then the third kind is what? He has a name for it. Yeah. Epistemic tools. He calls them epistemic.
Well, this kind of reminds me of my roommate and his conversation with one of my other roommate. So one of my roommates is a composer, so he write music, and one of my other roommate he plays guitar, and he is interested in making guitar by himself, and probably brought in some mass-produced way so that he can possibly bring the cost down. And he's talking about all those technologies and how the detection and sensor works in order to make this handmade guitar more standardized, I would say. But one of my other friends says, think of the music in a musical way, not a technological way. But still, I think it's nothing wrong to have this conversation with how the technology and sensor could bring a standardized piece because it's done to the piano. But for an instrument like guitar or violin, it's just so hard to have a standard of, the thickness of the wood and how the vibration works and such. And that's
Yeah.
why it's never been replaced by playing the guitar versus having the tone and coding the MIDI source on a computer.
You
The
know,
uncertainty, I would say.
yeah, I mean, it wasn't it David Pye where he talks about comparing the workmanship with wood with playing musical instruments. I think it's even in the other article too. Talking about in both cases, there's this idea of we have a musician, you have a composer, sometimes you have a composer, and the composer writes, it's like the designer. I think that was his analogy. The composer is like the designer, and designer can maybe make a spec in words and diagrams. Composer makes a spec in terms of a score, right? Hands it off to the musician, and the musical performer is like the workman, the craftsman, who then actually turns it into music, into sound by performing the score, right? And I think that's at the very beginning of that of the article, right? He says that the designer can talk about the gross and overall form, and the composer can talk about kind of the overall structure of the piece. What notes are played when, but it's up to the musician to really give it the actual living nuance, right? To actually sound it out. And at that moment of sounding instrument, playing instrument, you can tell I'm a former violinist, not a guitarist, right? So that's the actual working of the fingers and with dexterity, judgment, and care, right? That makes the actual music. You can tell he's on the side of the musician, right? Here,
There also,
please go ahead.
we're speaking of this as like a single solo artist, but often musicians especially are playing together, and so there is you're constantly working together to it's constantly adapting, even if it's subtle and small. There's little shifts and little changes, and you have to work with each other
Yep.
in a way that you can't. It just happens. Yeah.
And this will be a forward reference to when we look at performance in theater, and also even to the later section on generative assemblies and stuff. Yeah, absolutely. So these three categories of tools that Magnusson talks about, he talks about analog tools or instruments, what is it, electrical, and then he calls these epistemic. It's on page, come on, where's my mouse? Epistemic tools, section 6, page 173. Okay, epistemic tools. So why would he call those kinds of things epistemic? I mean, these are now, we're in the domain of the computer, all right? It's converted, whatever the signals are from the controller, we'll call it, what musicians call controllers, is now converted into digital form. They become symbolic. I also want to ask what that means. And epistemic. So now it's more of a brain thing. Okay.
Yeah, I was thinking about this a lot because I kept thinking, well, when you're youth, so you can have an instrument, an acoustic instrument, and you can play around with it, you can experiment with it, and you learn about that instrument through that process. You don't necessarily need a teacher. I mean, usually we have teachers, but if you're working with a digital instrument in the way that he's describing, you have to know you're transmitting some understanding of what you already know about music into this form, into this code that will then be played by the machine. So you're transmitting your knowledge through that instrument.
Yeah. Epistemic. When people say epistemic, what does that mean? What does that refer to when we say epistemic, this or that? Like epistemology, what does that mean? roughly.
How knowledge is built about something.
Yeah, a knowledge of, theory of, So, but like you're saying, like, Tanya's saying, people can just pick up an instrument, and just learn to play by hearing, right? By listening to what other people are doing and watching it. And then you start to move your fingers and you'll get better at it over the years, et cetera, et cetera. But you don't even need to know how to read music necessarily to play a musical instrument. So you don't have to have that kind of intermediate abstract representation in terms of a score. Also, there's another thing. Don't have to know theory of physics either, right? You don't have to know how wood vibrates and all the harmonic processes that are going on, oscillator theory. You don't need to know that theory in order to play the music instrument, right? So you don't need those two kinds of theory. One is the theory of the knowledge of how the physics works. The other is the theory, in the case of computer instruments, of how Python works, or super collider, or Maximus P. You don't have to know about whatever, how different kinds of concurrent processes work in this kind of hardware. You don't need to know any of that, right? Whereas if you are working as a computer musician, you have to know how to program in something, right? You have to know how to code. So bang, for Magnuson, right away, as soon as they had to know how to code in something, you're in the domain of the symbolic, domain of symbolic. So that's why I think he calls them epistemic, instrument knowledge, So that's, I think, useful. I mean, I'm sure if we poke at it, if we were all here today, I mean, in the room with Cameron and said, we can probably all poke holes into these categories, right? They're always, because there's always an episteme. You can always think and theorize about whatever you're working with, right? Nothing stops you from being epistemic, right? But it is interesting. It's not a requirement, right? Now we can leave the music part. But I mean, not leave, but we can expand beyond the music part. See, he's trying to explain some things in terms of these meta theories too. Like, what difference does it make to have a body? So let me ask you, okay? In these kinds of instruments, and I'm going to show you, I guess I should have shown some examples first, but after the next break, I'm going to show some slides of examples, okay? But you all know some examples. Actually, I shouldn't assume that. Have any of you played with, well, first of all, who's played any kind of musical instrument? I think some of you, Tanya, okay, great, all of you guys have. Who's played some electric instrument? Okay, guitar, piano, okay, electric. Fine, that's good. The analog is good. Then what about computer-based stuff? Computer-based stuff. That's the extra part. Come to AME, take a course. There's a lot of that. But you can imagine it takes programming of some sort. There are some languages that are more amenable than others to working with sound, and they're quite amazing, actually.
I did think a little bit about it's different than music, but I have experience just like with audio recording and editing. And I kind of kept relating, just because that's the experience I have, but I kept relating that to what we were reading about and how, yeah, I don't quite know where I'm going with that, but I just wanted to put that out there.
Yeah. That counts. I mean, I should have asked that too. Like, probably most people have had, fooled around with editing some sound or video, on your own phone. Even you can do it on your own phone. So, okay, that's fine. That's already computational processing of time-based media, sound and video. Now think about that. So you edit your own video segment, cut, copy, paste, and all that kind of thing. It's fine. Contrast. I mean, in a sense, it's a primitive but very useful way of creating video and sound. So it's kind of like an instrument, right? It is an instrument, actually. But contrast that with the degrees of freedom that are available to you if you have a full-on, guitar with a MIDI output, or anything, or piano, with a MIDI piano. So you have a lot more control of the fine scale structure. And the work that we've been doing in Synthesis Center and the lab that I had before and all these years with different labs is that we've been trying to work with all these decades and trying to learn from the highly evolved technologies for shaping musical sound with all these different kinds of what they call controllers, interfaces, right? That are a lot more elaborate than a keyboard and a mouse. And see if we can borrow some ideas there in order to apply, to give it to everybody else, you know. So that's kind of that's one of the big streams of research that I've been involved with. So not just me, a lot of people, okay. Not a lot of people, I should say. A lot of people are experts in the domain of musical expression, but very few people are trying to learn from that domain, very rich domain of human-computer interaction, and try to extract from that ideas that can be applied in general. That's different, okay. So this guy here, he was talking about the body, okay. Does anybody recall some of the kind of keywords he's using here for talking about embodied interaction? I'm looking for, I think, where it goes. I'm working backwards now through the paper to where he's going back to.
On page 174, toward the bottom of the first column, he talks about body embodiment and also virtual embodiment.
Yeah. Yes. I don't know what he means by virtual embodiment. What is he talking about there in terms of?
Well, he's speaking about certain systems that I'm not familiar with, so I'm taking his word for it here. But so let us reverse out of epistemological investigations, revisit the phenomenological point. It has been explored above how people learn acoustic instruments through an inactive and embodied practice. Digital music systems or instruments such as logic, pure data, the hands, or React table. Ooh, React table. I do know what that is. Pose a difficulty here. They do, of course, provide for a certain virtual embodiment, but the locus of their nature is fundamentally in the symbolic realm.
Yes, and we do need to see some examples, but that's a good place to look here. 174. Let's look here. 174. Okay.
I found the word inactive really interesting in that sentence.
Yes, that's what I'm looking for too. That goes together with embodied. So where would he have some?
He kind of defines it. I think on page 169, he pulls it from a definition from Valera. We propose the term inactive to emphasize the growing conviction that cognition is not the representation of a pre-given world by a pre-given mind, but is rather the enactment of a world and a mind on the basis of a history of the variety of actions that being in the world performs.
That's key, but needs to be unpacked. That's exactly.
Yeah, I was gonna.
There's
a lot there.
Yeah, thank you for finding it. That's what I wanted to find. And later on, I mean, you should look in the references, but there's a whole field of research called 4E, 4E. The 4 E's, meaning inactive, embodied, extended, and embedded cognition. And he's talking about some of those, embodied and inactive, the 4 E's. It's a very important set of scientific approaches, scientific / philosophical approaches to understanding cognition, but I would like to extend it to understanding experience in general. Okay.
Can you repeat those?
Embodied, inactive, extended, and embedded. Okay. So right here, inactive in a sense is, I think, the hardest one. But embodied, okay, we can start with that, embodied. It makes the difference that we have this body rather than some other body. And hey, has anybody seen Upload, that TV series? Gotta see it. It's very funny. At least season 1. It's very, very funny. Premises where they perfect the VR stuff and people can get uploaded into a machine, and you can see all these shenanigans that happen. So a lot of funny jokes about the difference between having a body and not having a body. And what difference does it make in terms of how you express yourself, how you can express yourself? Then the extended and embedded, basically they have to do with this idea that Magnuson talks about, which is how the thinking that we do, oh, we don't need this anymore. The thinking that we do happens also outside my body, happens outside your body, right? I mean, it's not just in this gray thing that's in between my temples here, the great organ, right? So what are some examples? Well, the classic examples are any of these, any instrument that you use, like a pen, piece of paper. Or in the case of a ship's navigator, famous example, ship's navigator, in the good old days, they have a big table, right? It's a huge map, and they have these compasses and rulers and protractors, right? So you physicalize the representation of the ocean around you onto this big table. And what's really interesting about that is all these people can gather around the table. So that shared map, you have, the captain, navigator, a couple officers gathered around that map are thinking collectively. So you have this kind of shared thinking going on, joint thinking going on, which is made possible by this big object with tools on, physical tools on it. Any other examples? Come up with some other examples of kind of extending thought into the world. What are some other examples?
I think about this a lot, about driving and how driving works collectively, and that we are out here on the road and we're just really trusting. There's a huge amount of trust in that everyone knows what to expect and knows how to act, and there is a lot of communication between people. And I shouldn't just say driving, but just traveling and moving around in the road, because also then there's people in cars and there's people in other forms of transit and pedestrians as well. And so there's just all this interaction and acting and reacting all the time with each other.
Absolutely.
And then a sense of social trust and a contract that we have with each other as well.
Absolutely. Care again, right? This kind of dexterity, judgment, and care extended to this domain. And to go on with this example of driving, I think is a great example. Has anybody tried? I mean, there must be. Well, probably we all have tried, like an arcade game, like a flight simulator or driving game, right? So, and then imagine where we're actually driving a real car somewhere else, but we're sitting like a drone operator. Suppose we're a drone operator. We're sitting in our own room, trying to drive a car that's remote. It's got telemetry coming back to you. All right. And so contrast the situation between that and physically driving the car, sitting in the car yourself. I wouldn't want to try it. Okay. I mean,
You guys know, I don't know.
hey,
But
Rachel.
my fiance happens to be really into NASCAR.
I think.
Yeah, sorry. It was not even that
choppy.
important of a comment, and I just hijacked the conversation.
Oh no, it's choppy. It's choppy. Go ahead. Try again.
Yeah, I just got alert. My internet's unstable. No, there's a NASCAR driver who's like a professional, who started doing e-racing. And he is, I think, the only one, or at least the first one, who made it like onto the professional track and does quite well. And my fiance isn't. I am not, but my fiance is a big NASCAR fan, and so he loves this story because he just thinks it's such a cool example that it's such an expensive sport to get into, and this like guy made it accessible.
But sorry, driving a car is remotely. Or driving.
Right,
Wait, sorry.
yeah.
Is it e-sport or is it driving a physical car remotely?
I think it was different. It was not driving a car remotely. It wasn't e-car like esports,
e-sport. Okay. Yeah.
But still kind of a cool concept to be able to translate from that to the road.
But see, that's a big difference right there, right? Because if it's driving a car telematically, that's a high challenge. I think that's a harder challenge than driving. It's already hard, but than driving a fully virtual car, actually. So besides the ethical questions, I try to caring about who you bump into. but there's also just a practical sensory motor, what's called sensory motor coupling between the body of the the human driver and the body of the car. Remember, I don't know if you remember when we're reading about embodiment in Merleau-Ponty, or anybody who's read some Merleau-Ponty, talking about all the discussion about when you get into a car, in a car that you may have driven before, but you forgot you drove it, and it takes a while, but you can sort of, your body has kind of muscle memory of where the gear is working, where the gear shift is, and all that kind of thing. And that just shows in the discussion that there's something that you learn somatically. It's called somatically. Somatic meaning body, in your muscles, not in your head, not cognitively. Okay, not about remembering, oh, there are 5 gears and they're 2 centimeters apart and blah, blah, blah. I had to change at 40 degrees angle. You don't build a abstract model of the car. Okay, your body just falls into place and it begins to move and act with resistance. That kind of somatic knowledge is tacit. It's not described in words or equations or diagrams. Okay. Think again of the case of the other article, right? What is it? Where the workmanship is different from design? It's not represented. Okay, it's tacit. And this shoots through all our embodied experience. Okay. Now we contrast it with automatic cars, with self-driving cars. Okay. If you need, now think about it. Some of you have written, well, we all have written in like cars like a Tesla, for example, has a big display. And actually, I'm fascinated by that because it has a big display, and I'm always fascinated by the the cool graphics, right? When you see a Tesla going past other cars, right? It has all the little beautiful little snaky lines, right, that come out showing you there's a lot of stuff going on there, right? And thinking all that as abstraction, right? All that's representation of the world versus you driving an analog car, your own analog car that you've been driving for a while, so you know where the car ends and where the other cars are. That's part of what Tanya's talking about too, like knowing where the other cars are. And like you look in the rear view mirror once in a while, you check and sort of see where the other cars are behind you, and you sort of know that maybe that car's coming up really fast on your left. So you sort of know you better not turn left into the left lane because it's probably right there. Even if you can't see it, it's probably there, stuff like that. Because you know the way where your blind spots are, et cetera, all these kind of things. And then in a Tesla or some other fancy car, right, they will do all this kind of analysis of the environment with a ring of cameras, convert it to data, then convert it to a graphic representation, then put it on the screen for you. You see, and then you're looking at the screen and they crash because you're not paying attention to the road anymore. Of course, I'm being snarky. Right? Because of all these mediations through abstract representations instead of feeling where the car is. Does this make sense? I mean, you know what I'm talking about, right? If you're a driver. We may be the last generations to drive a car, first of all. That's great, fantastic. So this example won't work in 10 years. All right. Okay. All right. So embodied, extended, inactive. This is a hard one. So let's go back to the quote. Rachel, thank you. So what is this? Cognition, I'll just repeat what we heard. Cognition is not the representation of a pre-given world by a pre-given mind. Okay, let's hold off right there. Pre-given, what is pre-given? Okay, pre-given meaning prior to what? Well, okay, prior to the moment of doing something, right? It's like driving a car. So pre-given means that, pre-given world means that even before this moment of, going through the intersection, the light changes, or the light is about to turn from yellow to red, excuse me, I had to decide, do I go through the intersection or not? Is this driving example okay? I'm just picking something that I hope is familiar. Okay. My son, who's now 30, said he doesn't want to drive a car. I mean, now he's driving a car. He got a license, but he said when he was like 20, he said, "No, I don't want to drive a car. I don't want to own a car. I don't want to ever have to do that." So I was very proud of him. But he broke down. In any case, pre-given, right? So this means that you kind of have a mental map of where everything is before you start doing something, right? Pre-given map of the world. Pre-given mind, now that's interesting. Because I just said, I Xin Wei, I have a kind of a map of the intersection and everything's going on before I enter it, that the I, that's the pre-given mind. Is it reasonable? I mean, normally I would say, yeah, I existed before the moment, but this is very radical, what they're saying there. So let's just pass over that one. But just want to point out, denying that is very, very radical. Very radical.
But Timmy, that map in your mind was built through your interacting with the world.
Exactly. That's what makes it interesting. It's actually something where the world and the subject co-articulate each other in the process of engagement. This is the part that's really the heart of what's called inactivism, this way of thinking. And this is worth spending time on, thinking about on your own. Okay. Meaning just wherever you're going, walking up the stairs or going to the elevator or whatever, cooking, just think a little bit about how, or even like walking, maybe, I don't know, on the street or in a mall, and you hear all these strangers talking around you, etc. And thinking about yourself as a self, and how maybe the self that you are is constantly changing and constantly forming itself as you go. Okay. How that could be happening. I have an example which isn't very good, but it's an example where maybe, if I go into a room, a party, let's say, a whole bunch of people there that I don't know, and I don't know anybody there except maybe the person who invited me. So lots of people. I hear this hubbub of voices. I don't hear anybody I know either. But I'm just listening. See, because I just walked in the door, I don't have an intention. I don't have to say anything. I don't have to be anybody. They don't know me. I don't know them. So in a sense, I'm not formed, right? I don't have a fixed identity really, until I meet somebody and I open my mouth and said, "Hi, I'm Xin Wei." At that moment, I start forming. Make sense what I'm trying to say? So that's a moment of forming your subject. It doesn't come out of, it's not random, of course not. And it's not completely, it does depend on many things, many priors. Okay, that's the kind of inactivism that I would like to maybe invite you to practice thinking about. Okay, next sentence. Instead of that, but rather, enactment of a world and a mind, okay, kind of like the example I gave you, on the basis of the history of the variety of actions that a being in the world performs. I don't think this definition is completely adequate, but the word history is important. History of actions. So, like it depends on what I do over time, right? Like how I extend my hand to you and the tone of my voice. Remember I was kind of singing my little, raising my voice and giving a continuous variation, in the room with you last week. So the tone of voice sets up receptivities. Like the way I approach, way I think, like I generally when I was pretty shy growing up, really, really shy. I had to actually, after grad school, I had to just get up and into a room with a party and just walk up to people and say, "Hi, I'm Xin Wei." And I remember that my shyness turned into courage just by making myself go up to people and say my name and extend your hand, you know. So it made me courageous. You know what I mean? I build courage by doing it. You know what I mean? So maybe you don't know because maybe you're not shy. But anyway, that's it's interesting, right? So it's not like I was courageous or shy, fixed property. It's not like that. Okay. Makes sense.
This is interesting. This is really interesting to me because I was never shy necessarily, but anxious I was quite a bit, always. And also constantly wanting to try new things, always, always, always. And my first jobs, and I still do this, I feel myself doing it, it's a little more subconscious now, but I just pretend to be a certain, like I'll just, like, oh, I have to go into this situation and I'm terrified. I do it, I think I used to do it a lot on stage, especially, right? Like I can't be me here right now. I have to be someone else. And so I would. So on my first job, I was like, I'm going to be, I used to like, I'm not whatever it is I'm doing. I just play it on TV, right? So I was like, I'm going to play this character and intentionally do it. And then all of a sudden it just be like, that's now, well, I guess that's who I am now.
Well, that's what it's about articulation, joint forming of relationships. And this examples that we're talking about now, what Tanya just said and what I just said, these are sophisticated examples of enacting, kind of enactivism, where, for example, suppose again in the party example, then these people don't know me, I don't know them. There's no prior relation, so there's no prior model of who Xin Wei is in relation to these people X, Y, Z. Okay. And it's only by engaging, by physically, reaching out your hand, physically speaking, or whatever, that that changes my relationship to the world, social world and physical world, and how the world responds to that change, right? Tells me something, right? It teaches me something. I know something more now about myself in relation to this room. So in activism, the inactive way of being is to for the organism, the creature, the person, to make changes in its relationship to the world, and then from the way the world is changing in response to those changes, learn something more about the world, which then informs it and how it's going to continue to make more changes in the world. Okay, this kind of loop. Okay, this is very important. This kind of inactive approach, combined with the fact that this is an organism with a body, with which has an embodied relationship to the world. Okay, this makes it so it makes a difference if I have a peg leg, if I'm on crutches or whatever, or if I'm sitting down instead of physically walking around. It makes a difference, obviously, right? Do you see, okay, having said all this, this furnishes us with a lot of concepts that will help us distinguish between different modes of experience versus working through Zoom on a keyboard with you, versus putting on goggles and doing a VR, versus sitting in an audience watching a movie, versus. These are all very different modes of embodied or more or less bodied engagement. Okay. So this is why people coming from this kind of 4E cognition, embodied cognition research, or sensory motor, what's called sensory motor research, it's obvious to these people how gigantic a difference there is between a so-called VR experience and other kinds of fully embodied experiences, fully embodied engagements. Okay. I have a PhD student working on this kind of work, Shomit Barua, who's working on all sorts of different kinds of interactive installations, video art, et cetera, et cetera. He has some interesting things to say about that. Okay, so we went off into epistemic stuff and active stuff. How about this? It's 8:25. I mean, it's 6:25. We have some time. I wanted to say a few more words about music instruments and stuff, but maybe we can take a break, and I'll come back from the break and show you some nice documentation of with ideas about instruments, okay, and tools. All right, let's take about 5-7 minutes. Take a good time to go out, take a break. All right, I'll keep my video going. So I'm not sure where we left off with the slides that I was showing last time, but let me just back up a little bit and share screen and ask you. Let's see here. Now, I think I talked about this jumping on the floor with feeling that you're jumping on a rubber sheet. And maybe was that, do you remember if that was the last thing I was showing? Probably, or nearly the last. Something like that.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yeah,
I think you should more past that.
maybe I did too, but it's okay. I can have a little dovetail overlap. So I think along the way, we've read a little bit of what's called phenomenology, which is the study of experience. I mentioned that, and Merleau-Ponty is a prime example of that. And Merleau-Ponty wrote about embodiment too. Okay, so that's kind of a recap. And I have some examples around that. So that are pointing to this difference between just the sense that you get from your senses and seeing, touch, hearing, the kind of conventional way of thinking about sensing the world through your senses, and the phenomenological approach to experience, thinking about what's called the apperceptive, like what the senses point to, but don't necessarily explicitly completely represent. And in this example, with the jumping on the rubber sheet, there was no rubber sheet. This is just a concrete floor. And I was saying that it seems to me that this feeling of elasticity that I felt, that everybody felt actually, came about through this coincidence, this synchronization of the motion of the body with the widening and narrowing of the mesh. Okay, that coordination of rhythm basically is probably what gave a great sense of that elasticity. Okay. Now, I mentioned in passing the word sensory motor when I was talking about inactivism. So, and it's a very important scientific field, which is basically thinking about how, that's what I was describing just before break, how the way we know the world comes about through this physical engagement, making a physical change in my relationship to the world. And then the world reacts, or, also changes, let's say, in coordination, in concert with my activity. And that concerted, I don't want to use the word response. Normally it's response, because if you say response, then it's like I do something, then the world does something, and then I wait for it to do its thing, and I do my thing. That's not how it works, right? And here's a perfect example from Kevin O'Regan, who's one of the main researchers who started this field of sensory motor research. It's a sponge. And if we were in the same room, I would just bring a sponge to the room, and say, hold it in your hand. How do you know it's soft? Well, not by looking at, well, let's just say this. If I just show you a picture of this thing and I ask you, is it soft? Well, you probably would say yes, right? Because it looks like a sponge. But I could have made it out of ceramic. It would look the same, right? So you really can't tell. You can't sense its softness really by looking at it. So why do you say it's soft? If I tell you, look at this picture and you tell me, do you think it's soft? Why do people say mostly that it's soft?
because I felt it before. I felt something that looked just like that before.
And they've seen sponges. So it's a representation. Or back to representation, right? But if I say, how do you know it's soft? Well, you had to hold it in your hand, and you go like this. Well, pretend this is a sponge, and you go like this. I try to contract my fingers, right? And the material has a certain kind of resistivity to it. It resists and gives way to my fingers as they compress. And the way that it gives way will be different if it's a sponge versus if it's a glass, right? Actually, versus if it's piece of origami paper too, because this doesn't feel spongy to me. It'll give way, but it's actually sharp and crinkly, and it sort of cuts against my skin, et cetera, kind of collapses. It crunches and then it collapses, et cetera. I don't even have the words for it. So this is what I think the best example from Kevin O'Regan about sensory motor, how sensory motor engagement gives us a sense of the felt sense of the world. And softness is a really good quality of matter that can only be sensed through this kind of engagement. Make sense? Okay. And then it's, again, as you go around maybe for this coming week, just think about it. I mean, how what you sense of the world is the result of this physical changing and the physical changes that you make in your relationship to the environment, and how the environment is changing too in response, and how you are learning from that. Okay, because it's hard to actually decouple, to take away the gloss through representation. Okay, so think about that. Think about where representations are actually doing the trick. And you think you know what's going on because you're actually mediating through a representation, which reminds you of something, other experience. Okay, or that somebody told you. Let's go on. Do you remember this picture I showed earlier, excuse me, of a mom teaching her kid to ride a bike? Same picture, okay? So with that sensory motor example of the sponge in mind, think about this. Think about what's actually going on there that we can't see, right? The boy is pushing down with his right leg, on the pedal. And maybe if he doesn't quite coordinate it, he's also pushing down with his left leg. And then everybody's known you do both at the same time, you don't go anywhere, right? And but if you push down with the right leg, probably will go forward. The bicycle will begin to roll forward, etc. And the mother's holding the rear of the bike, right? And you can feel the tension of the body, and the bike would tend, if it tends to lean over one side, she'll feel more tension. Her hand pushes it back, blah, 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 right? It takes too many words to describe what's going on instantly and in infinite dimension. It's a very, very nice example. So this kind of sensory motor engagement of not just one body, but multiple bodies with each other, with the world, with the physics, with the bicycle, et cetera, with the ground even, that all that is helping the body learn how to ride a bike. And that learning isn't going through diagrams of words or equations, right? Not even going through a video of the scene. The kid doesn't watch a video in this case, but it gets incorporated. It's nice word, incorporation. Corp, it's body, right? So incorporation. And another, a fancier term would be somaticization. Kind of somatic knowledge. Muscle memory is called also. Make sense? Okay. So what I showed this one, I think I did, right? For the dancers. Did I show this one for the dancers? I don't see any nods yet.
I think you showed one like this, but it wasn't this one.
Okay, so this was one of the experiments we did in the you hear the music? This is work done by some of my PhD and graduate students, and synthesis early on. And some dancers from the dance department were part of this research group. So I'll pause it. Click on the draw camera. And I just watch for it. Okay. It's a loop, so I can't do it like that. Okay. This is an example of some of the research that we've done in this domain of sensory motor, engagement, trying to understand how people get a sense of what's going on, communicating, so to speak, right, without words, but also get a sense of their own relationship to the space around them and to each other. Okay, all without words. And the experiment, this is an experiment, so it has some specific kinds, aspects of the experience that we were looking at. We're trying to understand how people coordinate together. Remember all the way back to the Wittgenstein example where there's a toy language and there are two people working on building a brick wall. One person says slab, brick or whatever, and the other person hands the first person the object in question. But that's a very, very sparse and artificial example of communication. Here, we're looking at this kind of rich multimodal communication without words. And what I'm conjecturing here is that, well, maybe language, you don't have to think of language as always just using words. Maybe we can think of not how language works, but what effect it has. So what if we say not just language has the effect of two big things. One, coordinating attention. It coordinates people's attention to something or to several things. Two, it coordinates intention, meaning what people aspire to do, intend to do. So language has this powerful effect of coordinating attention, joint attention, and joint intention. And I really think this is a very powerful way. It doesn't come from me, okay? I'm rephrasing a lot of philosophy in these two compact ways of saying what language does. You see, this is a very powerful move, and you can do this too when you're going to do your own work. Is sometimes kind of the engineering approach to things makes demands that we explicitly specify the observables and the units that we use to measure the observables, how many seconds, how many inches, how many dollars, or whatever, or what is it made of, are we working with steel or whatever, or working with bytes? Instead, maybe we can think about what is the effect? What is the effect? In this case, the effect is coordinating these dancers. I told these dancers, look, I suggested the following. I said, the three of you, and this I got from a friend of mine, Michael Montanaro, who's a choreographer. I said, let's say the three of you are a clock. The three of you together, your three bodies form a clock. And you can dance freely, improvise, okay? But the idea is that metaphorically, poetically, you're a clock, and the bodies are the mechanisms of the clock. And furthermore, whenever there's too much space between a body and a portion of another body, too much airspace, fill that space. So the dancers are moving in such ways to maybe separate or leave a gap between my arm, let's say, another person's chest. A third dancer might reach her hand or leg into this open space. Okay, this is an exercise that Michael Montanaro suggested to dancers in my former university. We had a lot of really wonderful movement studies done through these different kinds of specifications. So we did this. Okay, that's the ostensive goal, and they did a lot of fun. You saw them. In addition to that, one of my PhD students, Michael Kuzajaniak, created some custom sensors with some electronics, some math that they could wear on their bodies that would sense not where the hand is or where the body is, not where it is or how fast it is, but which way is it pointed? In other words, the palm of my hand, is it facing this way or this way or this way or this way, or the shoulder, is it oriented toward the ceiling like right now, or is it now oriented toward the screen, and they wore these on their body, and it would send all this data back. It would send all this data back to our computers in real time. So we had this stream of information about orientation. Like this dancer's shoulder is oriented this way. This dancer's palm is oriented this way, moment by moment. And we did the correlation computation, just some signal analysis. This now gets into the maths in the we part of it, to indicate to us, to give us a sense of when the changes in orientation were coordinated. It's not at all the same thing about, because my conjecture was that how do dancers know that they're together? And when are they not together? When are they it's like in a room, you go into the living room, go home or something like that. Somebody's washing dishes, somebody's just watching, watching some Netflix, and somebody's, whatever, dressing the baby, who knows, okay? But these are events that are not correlated. Or maybe there are other events that are correlated, because maybe one person's washing dishes while the other person's telling this person what happened today, and then, and so that the activities, the shape is completely different. One person's going like this with the hands with the soap, the other person is standing there talking, blah, blah, blah. But the timings are related. You see what I'm saying? So that there's a kind of synchrony going on between these different bodies doing very different things that look very different to the camera. And yet there's synchrony in the second case, whereas in the first case, they're not synchronized. So we were trying to do this experiment where we could sort of maybe find other measures of synchrony, degrees of synchrony, social synchrony that you could observe. And the conjecture was maybe it's the changes in orientations of different parts of the body, when they're correlated, gives us a sense that it's some synchrony going on. This is a research, okay? I'll give you a very kind of enough description of the experiment, which combines all these different ideas, from embodiment and activism to correlations, to all sorts of things, correlations of orientation, all sorts of theoretical ideas, but bound to a very concrete form of three dancers dancing together. Oh, and the music is synthesized according to the degree of synchronicity. So there's also some music synthesis going on too. Okay, that's the art part of it. Okay, and the dancers were responding to the music too. So this is kind of research that we've been doing in Synthesis Center, AME, other labs, okay, where we combine these ideas from phenomenology, from computer science, processing, signal processing, blah, 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 okay, to kind of understand certain ideas, basic questions like how does nonverbal communication work? Any questions? Ideas? Hope you're interested. I mean, we're always interested in more, more experiments. All right, let's go on. I'm going to go back to share screen again. Now I'll go faster, okay? We've read some articles about instruments, tools. Anybody want to give us a kind of a rough and ready distinction between like a tool versus an instrument, or different kinds of instruments? I know that, but tools versus instruments. When would we want to say tool? When would we want to say instrument? And there are different kinds of instruments. Tool versus instrument.
I mean, I can cheat. I Googled it. I can say what the first answer from Google. It says that an instrument is used for data collection, storage, analysis, management, or monitoring. This is obviously not meaning a musical instrument, but a tool is used to measure, manipulate, or fabricate. So they're both things that we use, but an instrument's more about observing and a tool is more about changing.
Yeah, there, right there. Fine. Okay, tool is more about changing material situation. Okay, it doesn't have to be material, just changing the situation. Okay, that's fine. Because you have a mathematical tool, sorry, as well. Instrument is for measuring something. And then we also read papers about musical instruments. So two kinds of instruments, two basic big categories. One is instruments for, you said measuring, right? Measuring something, measuring / observing. And the other kind of instrument for expressing, let's say. All right. So let's say, yeah, roughly. Fine. Let's take that. But that's a useful distinction between tools versus instruments. All right. But I'm really interested in the instruments used for expression. So here's, I think you, in the article by Magnuson mentioned the hand. This is it. And one of the famous symphonic music in the world. So, awesome. He custom designed this, and I think he built this also, an amazing, a legendary musical instrument where I don't have detailed close-ups of this, but two-handed instrument with a lot of sensors built into them to measure movement, acceleration, angle, relative distance to the other hand. I think some photocells that could detect, incident light, maybe. Certainly pick up microphone. You see it in the next video. All sorts of sensors, but he used them in a way to, in a sense, to pack sound into the so-called the air between his two hands. And by moving his hands, he could shape that sound in all sorts of ways. It's as if he could capture the sound and put into this kind of snake hanging virtually into the air between his hands, and you can see him modulate it. And you'll see this in the second video, what he does. Oh, can you hear sound? Okay. I'm sorry, we don't have time. He's an amazing performer, actually, amazing performer, and you have to just look him up. I'll share the slides with you. Look him up and look for documentation. He's a legendary performer because not only was he technically a genius, he was also able to make really powerful performances with these custom instruments, etc. So it'd be interesting to look at, the degrees of freedom and expressivity you can get when you have thicker interfaces between the body and the computational media. Okay, please move on. This is all example, but what's interesting about this example that you can look at later when you have time is here there's a lot more symbolic processing going on behind the scenes. People talk about artificial intelligence these days, Gen AI stuff. Those are usually done with very simple kinds of category-based training on text corpora. This is also AI, but it's a lot more sophisticated because it deals with pattern recognition and pattern rewrites, basically based on both analog and tokenizations of the music that's being performed live, blah, blah, blah. So the piano on the left-hand side, I think, is a Yamaha MIDI piano. So it's algorithmically controlled, but it plays in accompaniment to improvised accompaniment to the musicians. Lauren Hayes is one of my colleagues in AMA. She's teaching a course. She's really brilliant as a performer and a theorist and a teacher. And for her PhD work, what she did was she was also an expert pianist, right? She built these haptic feedback onto her hands so that as she was playing, it also put pressure onto her palms, I guess, and well, palms maybe. And the pressures that were generated was not just simply, direct mappings from something. It was actually composed. All right. So it's not just instruments, not just for expression, but also instruments to mediate the sensory motor relationship between you and the world. In this case, between you and the piano and the world. Okay. So, and she's done a lot of work on haptics and et cetera, et cetera. And what I wanted to end with today was a little discussion and just set up some terms for a little bit more about what we mean by instruments. Okay. So musically, right, we have an instrument like an analog instrument like a clarinet with keys, or a violin with strings, etc. It communicates with the world, and you have ensembles of people playing these instruments, which is very different from the bottom here, which is a piece of a max patch that you use to write some code in, and then that in turn can modulate what data comes through it, okay, which ultimately comes from sound and can go back into sound. But this bottom here is symbolic processing. Start with an instrument like this, it has this notion of tuning and calibration. But if you look at a software instrument, this is all inside code, right? No air. There's no air going through this diagram, right? No physical fingers on it. But it does have stuff going in and out. Video coming in this case, video going out, and some numbers, parameters that can control the algorithms that are processing the video in and then going out. Could be sound, could be audio. Okay. An instrument like this, we can put a whole bunch of them into the software, into the computer. So we can have an ensemble of software instruments, and they all have media, sound or video, okay, going in and going out. And they all have parameters, numbers, that can be changed by some other program, right? Some other algorithm that modulate how the processes work. Okay, these are all computational processes. So it's all abstract, right? There's no air going through here. So when we create ensembles in this kind of hybrid between, analog or computational instruments, we can think about what goes in and what goes out. It could be that what goes in are just numbers from other pieces of code. So those are parameters computed by other algorithms. Or it could be data which once upon a time, at some point, was analog. It was vibrations in the air, right, on a wood, or motions of a body, which get converted into digital tokens, zeros and ones, that then can be passed into these virtual instruments. Okay. So when we say instrument, it can get a lot richer this way. This is behind what Magnuson was writing about, in his paper. Too bad, he should have put in some diagrams. Okay. And finally, I just showed this video of an instrument that that I in my lab created, the topological media lab created years ago in Montreal, which was this beautiful, how was it? It was like, wow, 4 or 5 meter wide, long, 1.5, 2 meter wide tapestry woven on a gigantic jacquard loom, which is a computer controlled loom. And it was woven out of silk and silver organza thread. And the other direction was cotton. It's a beautiful one of a kind piece of tapestry, a woven piece, where the figures, like the birds and the diagrams, were not just decorative, they were also woven out of the silk silver organza thread, so that they could act as capacitors. They were like antenna, and they could feel the electrostatic energy, the electrostatic field around living bodies, like people. And it was really big, so you could drape it around several bodies. So it could be, or it could be put on a table, could be hung in the air. And this way, it was an instrument not to be played by one body at a time, but by any number of bodies. It wasn't limited in that sense. Like a piano can only put two or three two pianists down at most, right? And a piano has only 88 keys, whereas this has infinite degrees of freedom, because as soon as you get close to this silk birds, the patterns, it begin to pick up the electric field and can modulate the field by going like this, right? And then when you touch, it can detect the touch and change the sound. So it could be like wind sound, you can go like this, but then when you touch, it can turn into birds. At that moment, it can nuance the bird. So let me just show you.
It's good to always have people in the shots. It's humanity too.
David Gautier was an engineer philosopher, so he's not a dancer, you can tell, right? I've got a documentation. I'm just showing this kind of like, these are obviously one-of-a-kind experiments. And the work since then, this is quite a long time ago, is to see how can we bring back some of these knowledge about how to design really thick interfaces with really thick processes, media processes, when we go to other very complex systems, really complex systems, like a weather model or a model of the economy or a governance system, things like that. That's been a long work, like, a decade of work. Because the idea here is that if you have a really complex system, like the economy or something like this, with the weather and the climate, is too many variables. There's no way any human being can understand that. And if you try to use abstractions like algorithm, then, again, there's no exercise of judgment, right, or care. In that case, it's already abstracted. You have algorithms doing the analysis. So one of the big motivations for the research that we've been doing is how can we make it possible for groups of people to get a felt sense of what's going on, like hydroelectric power plant or the economy or whatever, but a felt sense, not just going to the head, the brain, a really thick sense that's palpable, and you can get better at it, and you can get a sense of everything, the whole dynamic of what's going on, right? And we're making a little bit of progress toward that. Okay, that's it for today. Any questions? Any last questions? Okay. It's a lot to observe. So we'll meet on the, was it 13th or something? But I'm hoping for next week can take some time. We won't have time to really discuss too much, but take some time to at least look through the Simondon. I'll send an email with a few terms maybe to look out to read for, to help you just navigate your way through it. There's a lot to it, so you don't have to really, well, you can expect to read through multiple times, but just read for certain kinds of ideas that I will give you. All right, and hope you have a productive or at least restful break. Okay.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.
See you.